Welcome back, everyone. Here we are for another episode of Insights from the Couch, Mental Health at Midlife, with my co-host Laura Bowman. I'm Colette Fair. We're both licensed therapists, as many of you already know. And today we are taking on a really important topic that's near and dear to my heart that you won't want to miss, which is the inner emotional lives of men. What's really going on behind and beneath that smooth, unruffled surface? Yeah. Right? I mean, it's the analogy. Obviously, there are different presentations, but the first thing that pops into my mind that I see a lot in couples therapy, the duck is gliding along at the water, and beneath the legs are frantically kicking. And of course, what I mean by this analogy is that there's a lot going on within men that we don't see, that it's historically not been safe to address and discuss. It has not always been okay for men to show emotion. And what we want to talk about today is what's going on, some of the common issues, and then also the fact that men have the same longings and needs for connection and vulnerability. And in fact, often even more so from their partner because they don't get it from other sources the way we as women do. So that was a lot. Let's dig in. Let me let you talk.
No, I love this topic. I see a lot of men. We both really like men.
Yes.
I mean, we're real big fans of good men.
I'm glad you said that because there's so much man hating now. It's really sad.
And a whole move towards like hyper masculinity, and masculinity is like really up in the air in this culture. But when you see, I mean, men that come to therapy, especially individual counseling, it's a man that has a certain level of openness and humility. They tend to not be too high in narcissism or they wouldn't come. So, and usually a man comes to therapy either by way of his partner, or I very often see them when they're in a tremendous amount of pain or a breakup or a loss of some kind. Yeah. But the men that stay in therapy and do the work, it is such a beautiful thing to see. They grow in an amazing way.
I think it's because we're therapists in a way that we both like men so much because we see under the hood. You know, if you're going to make the time and come pay us, eventually, theoretically, you have to talk about what's really going on. Some will still resist, especially in couples therapy. But you see the vulnerability, you see the wounds that are held. And a lot of times partners don't see that from their spouses. And of course, right now, we're talking about heteronormative relationships because we're speaking to women at midlife who have husbands. And I just want to acknowledge that this does not apply to everybody, of course. But there are so many friends I have in marriages where, you know, they'll say, my husband doesn't show any vulnerability. He doesn't show any emotion. I don't know what's going on half the time. And I will say sometimes I feel like I have to, you know, extract a tooth to get my own husband to, he'll go there, thank God, but it's not his natural state to just go, hey, let me tell you all about what I'm feeling, Colette.
Yes.
Show me the guy who does that.
Well, I'm married to an external processor, so I get a tremendous amount of information, but it takes a long time to get to like that emotional truth. It's a lot of stuff coming towards you, but not that feeling level. And I think that men are, you know, they're kind of a paradox. They're simultaneously say all the time, like, oh, we're so simple. Men are so simple. Don't you hear that all the time?
Well, you know the 3 F's, right?
Yeah. But you know what? Let's unpack the 3 F's for a minute. Okay. Fuck, feed, flatter. That's 3 out of the 5 love languages. Seriously, right?
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think
if I were getting that, I'd be getting 3 out of the 5 love languages.
Right. So, you know, just to slow this down for a second, the 3 F's are feed me, fuck me, flatter me. And the idea is that if you do those 3, this is so grossly antiquated. I could actually kind of puke.
Yeah.
However, it's a trope, but you know, I do think, like many cliches,
there's a grain.
Yes, and possibly a large grain. The theory is that a lot of men, if you feed, fuck, and flatter them, they'll be happy and really don't care about anything else.
Yeah, can I add a fourth F that I see
Sure.
a lot? You got to be fine. Men want their partners to be good.
Yeah.
So many male partners that are checking in on their wives. Are you good? Is everything, are you happy? It's basically like, are you happy with me?
Yeah.
And if you're happy with me, then I can be okay.
So I'm glad you brought this up because this comes up a lot in couples therapy and it's germane to what we're talking about today. That is a really tough principle or a recipe for a woman feeling like she can actually talk about her feelings. And what's really going on there is not just, are you okay? Because I really care so much about you. I'm not saying they don't care about you, but what's also going on there is I can't be okay unless you're okay. If you're not okay, my wife, my partner, then I'm failing. One of the biggest
Yes.
ones, right? Men and
Yes.
failure. We could do a whole thing on that. That's the chord that so much strikes when women will say, my partner gets dismissive, defensive, detached. It's to deal with underlying feelings of shame, which often narrate themselves as stories of failure.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. I'm inadequate. I'm not doing a good job of providing for my family. If my wife's unhappy, I must be doing something wrong. And then rather than sit in that discomfort and to be able to recognize those feelings and also see your partner as a separate individual with her own feelings, they go right into these strategies.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I call them the bad partner communication report card. So it is, I write about this in my book, that you have three D's and an F: defensiveness, dismissiveness, distancing, and fixing.
Ugh. Yes. The
Right? Those,
fixing. Yeah.
the fixing. Oh my God. If you try to give me advice or solve my problem, I'm going to like smack you.
But this is how men talk to themselves. You know, a lot of the men that I see, they have careers that have like beat this whole like logical way of functioning into them. And these
Yeah.
are the tools they're working with. This is how
Right.
they talk to themselves.
Right.
Move yourself out of this. Don't feel what you're feeling.
Yep.
Shift it. You know, and this is why they have precious little space sometimes for a partner, because they have precious little space for themselves.
Exactly. And that's really one of the difficult things. I mean, there are a lot of emotionally intelligent men out there. I just have to say that I know several. I have a father who's emotionally intelligent, although not as comfortable with vulnerability, being nearly 80 and of the great generation. And there are men who come to therapy where I'm blown away by how they can talk about their feelings. So this by no means applies to everyone. But there are so many men who it all starts with the conditioning in early childhood, especially for men in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and up. It was not a climate back then that was conducive to men exploring and sitting with feelings. And you're absolutely right. If this is how you're trained, I mean, I hear all the time still from people, vulnerability seems weak. Expressing that I'm hurt, saying that I need something. There are men, I even have some younger men who think that if they're a good husband, it's all about being strong, handling all of their stress and issues on their own, shouldering that for their wife and kids, and really just they're pushing their feelings into just a rock inside that becomes a boulder and either turns into illness or it's like the shaken can of bubbly soda. Eventually it explodes in some form of anger.
I see that as well. And we have to just acknowledge this sort of double edged sword that like women present about vulnerability. We want vulnerability. We say we want vulnerability. And very often when we see it, we find it unattractive.
Okay, do you find it unattractive?
No, but I have
Because
seen
I
it.
don't.
I don't find it unattractive, but very often women will report that when a man finally gets vulnerable, I recall a situation where a man said to his wife, I just was like almost in tears. And he says, I just really hate my job. I hate going every day. Like it was like soul crushing. And she said, I just find that highly unattractive.
Okay, well, that's disgusting.
I mean, I think it was, I don't think she said that in the moment, but what I'm saying is the sentiment was like,
Okay.
I need a man
She
who
said it to
works.
you. She
Yeah.
said it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And men sense that. Men intuit that their vulnerability and their real feelings may be perceived as unattractive and make them less masculine or less desirable.
absolutely. And I think men with partners who would welcome that type of vulnerable self-expression can still perceive that. And in fact, Stuart Fentersheim, I may be pronouncing that wrong. We're going to link to his article. He's a man and a therapist, and he wrote a great article on the experience of men and this dilemma we're discussing. And he references Brene Brown's research, which is that she was shocked to find exactly what you're talking about, Laura, that so many women want vulnerability and then are disgusted by it. And in fact, the women who are the most critical of men for opening up and being vulnerable are the ones who are the most demanding of it. What a double bind.
It's a double bind.
Yeah.
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 So it's understandable that men don't believe that. And you know, when I start with men, a lot of times will break out like a feelings wheel because men do not have access to their full range of feelings. They really don't.
I know.
They live on like one side of the feelings wheel.
What side of the feelings wheel do you think?
Just the side of competence, effectiveness, functioning, like joy. I mean, that doesn't feel right, but you know, there's sort of stable, steady emotions,
Achievement
anger.
oriented. Yeah.
Anger
I mean,
is one thing they can feel.
the thing that I will hear from most men, I mean, my job is really to try to help people get vulnerable with their partner.
Yeah.
And it can sometimes feel like Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill for me because of all this conditioning, lack of safety. I mean, we're talking often about people having certain beliefs about not showing emotion from the beginning of time. But the number one word I hear all day, and I would even go as far as to say, for some men, this may be the only emotion, negative, so-called negative emotion, no emotions are negative, of course, but that they'll cop to is frustration.
Oh, I know.
It's frustrating.
It's so
It's frustrating. Everything is fucking frustrating.
I know.
You know? It's just
It's like the word interesting. It just like does a lot of work.
Right. There's a lot of
nothing.
work.
Yeah.
Right. And then there are all of these, you know, there are 7 core emotions, and then there are all these granular emotions that really capture the experience.
And what I see in men, because you're trying to get them to express vulnerability in a couple session, I'm trying to get them to connect vulnerably to usually to parts of themselves, to have some self-compassion, to see, because if a man can begin to have space and compassion for that 14-year-old boy, that 7-year-old boy, that 21-year-old boy, these are like inflection points where injury happened. And they can make space for their own sadness. Sadness is one men will not sit with very long.
Not many.
Not many. But you know what? When they do, and they can make space for those parts, they have more space for their partner. And everybody, really, and their kids. But this is, like you said, it's like Sisyphus. This is not a natural thing for men to want to do. They compartmentalize, they disassociate.
Yep.
They strategize and they move forward.
Exactly. It's problem solving. And I think an important point we're making that's so true is that all people will relate to you in emotion the way they relate to themselves. So when someone has a tendency to go below the belt or get ugly, it's because that's how they talk to themselves in their inner voice. So when you get these solution focused, solve the problem, give advice, fixing parts from men, fixing strategies, it's because that's how they deal with their own emotions. And if someone is emotionally unavailable to themselves, it's very difficult to be emotionally available to anyone else. And what I really want to say here is, even though it's often outside of people's conscious awareness, what's happening beneath all of that fixing, defensiveness, dismissiveness, compartmentalizing, way down deep is fear. It is genuine fear, and you can't always see it. And the man who's feeling it doesn't always know it, but it's there. And it's fear of jeopardizing the relationship, being a failure. If I can make the problem go away, right? There's no discomfort. It's fear of being uncomfortable. All of those things are outside of awareness. Now, regardless, and we can have compassion for that, it makes for a very frustrating experience to be on the other side when you're trying to talk about your feelings and you get a brick wall.
For sure. It's not easy. And men, like you said, like really value effectiveness. They want to feel effective in their relationships. And when they don't, they'll go to wherever they can feel effective. And so if that's work or some other place, they will like just reroute themselves to where they can get those feelings and needs met.
And so much, speaking of sadness and rerouting, Terry Real, who's a very well-known therapist and, in with all the stars, and he made his break in the 90s with a book. What is it called? I don't want to talk about it. Something about unlock. We're going to link to it in the episode. But basically what he talked about is that male depression is rampant. And because it's not okay for men to express feelings, you don't see that it's depression. It's not acknowledged. Instead, it's workaholism, alcoholism, affairs, rageful anger, disconnection. That whole trope from the past that may still go on in a lot of households of the man coming home from work and like sitting in front of the TV with a beer or something and just totally checking out.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of times that is an attempt to cope with a complex stew of challenging emotions that men don't feel that they can give voice to.
Yeah. And as somebody who is raising two boys right now. I have an almost 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I grew up with an older brother that was 2 years older than me. I see, and I would like to think that I have just endless emotional availability to hold to hold whatever they feel, and I'd love to process it all if they want to process it all. But there's something that happened to my boys, I think right around 6th grade. And I think they become aware of how they're supposed to function in the world. And there's just a door that closes where they just, they do not want to talk about things. I mean, my daughter will process things in the house openly all the time.
Yeah.
The boys do not. And and I see a lot of these compartmentalization and dissociation tactics in my boys where it's like, I'm not inviting that part of them. But they know from the culture it's not cool. And I even go back to like when my parents were divorcing and I was very sad and grief stricken and I really sat in it and I journaled about it and I cried about it. And when I'd look over at my brother, he would be sitting watching the TV completely disassociated.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. And I thought, God, he hasn't processed a goddamn thing that's happening to him.
Yep.
And that is how our men just kind of roll forward until they can't anymore.
And then it comes out in a scrambled signal, oftentimes that doesn't always look like what it is. And our mission with this episode in large part is to say, even the man who seems so, let's just say the strong, silent type, or never seems to have ruffled feathers, men are just as vulnerable. They are just as desirous and longing for connection. They want to be loved. They're soft inside. Like you said, that little boy is in there. All those little boy parts are in there. And I know we both work on a lot of parts components in therapy. And when I do the meditations that access child parts with a couple, and for many men, this is the first time they've touched those inner child parts. It is such a beautiful, amazing thing to see. There's so much healing that can come there. But it's not a typical thing that people do on their own.
No, and I guess what I also want to express to our female listeners is how important a man's connection is to their partner. Like this is, I think we touched on it with that article and we're going to link up to it. But he talks about how men really don't have a ton of connection points. Even if they have a group of male friends, what are they talking about? They're talking about the stock market and tennis and the football team.
Right.
They're not talking about deep emotions. Men do deep emotional work with their partner.
Or not at all. Or not at all.
But being able to connect, having a soft place to land with a partner, being able to access a partner for affection and physical connection. And it's not all about sex, but it's important for a man. That's very often how they feel like steadied and connected to a
Yeah, I
partner.
think it is a primary way, and it often gets misunderstood by women as my husband just wants sex because he just, it's physical. I'm being used.
Yes. Yeah. I'm
you
a
know,
receptacle.
Yeah. And really, the truth is, this is a very real thing. Women need emotional connection to want to have sex. Men need sexual connection to even consider opening up. And it's not just about orgasm and release. It is the primary way men connect. And for so many men, it's been the only way they've ever been allowed to connect through their whole lives.
Oh, when you say that, I feel that. That's so true.
I know. And we're changing it. I mean, I hope we're changing it. At least as therapists, I feel like we're changing it one client at a time.
And just when the connection with their female partner, and I obviously same-sex couples, it's probably similar, but
Yeah,
for
for sure.
the purposes of our conversation, when that connection is threatened, men feel really adrift, just like women do too. But men don't know where to go with that.
This is why I think people assume it's ego-based that, when men and women get divorced, men have a new partner in about a nanosecond. And there may be an ego-based component some of the time, but a big part of it is that men really struggle without a partner because they don't have any place to engage in this way. Whereas we have friends. I mean, you and I will go to dinner and talk about everything and not just deep topics. So there are men that might talk about deep topics, but they're not going to get into the emotions that go with them necessarily.
Right.
You and I will go deep. We'll sit there. I mean, how many times have we sat in a restaurant and one or both of us has tears streaming down our face that we don't even bother to wipe away? We let ourselves cry. We let ourselves be sad.
Definitely.
And I mean, show me two men that are at like Enzo's over the pasta going,
weeping.
Right. Where I feel
like a fucking failure.
Yeah.
Although it wouldn't be great if they could.
Totally. I mean, this is what's missing. So I think this comes back to, what can we do as partners? We're not responsible for men's emotional lives. I want to say that very definitively because that is something I used to do as a younger person. And I hear a lot from clients. Let me manage your emotions because you're not good at it. Let me take care of them. Help you open up, point out to you what you don't see. It's hard enough to take care of your own feelings. Nobody needs this job for somebody else.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, it's an important point.
Yeah.
It really is. And if you're doing that for your partner, fire yourself immediately. Your job is to be in touch with and manage your own emotions and then to create a climate where you invite openness, experiential sharing, emotions, and to be accepting of and validating of your partner when and if they do open up vulnerably.
From your talk, you sent me the little thing about questions where vulnerability is welcomed but not required. Yeah. I feel like that's a really nice place for men. Inviting them in but not requiring them to get there.
Yes. And actually, we could link to some of that too in the show notes and on our website, insightsfromthecouch.org. What kinds of questions have lower stakes? I mean, if you go up to a man who's never opened up and say, tell me about your hurt, your fear, and your sadness.
They're going to,
yeah, or they're going to be like the road runner, gone before you can even catch a glimpse of the dust. However, if you ask experiential questions, and what I mean by that are questions that invite conversation about values, beliefs, experiences, and allow for emotion and storytelling, people will start to open up and not feel forced into too much vulnerability. They'll sort of wade into it, and it allows for a really nice exchange. So it's just shifting and deepening your questions from, what'd you do today, to what was the best part of your day?
Yeah.
Did anything surprise you today? How are you coping with XYZ situation? Ask people, and you might only get a little teeny bit back. It's not magic. But, people want to have connected conversations. It is the human way.
Yeah, they really do. And I hear
Even
that
men.
over and over again from the men that I see. And they want to be connected to their partners, and they want to, I have a lot of men that are fear-based and want to make the right decisions in the world and are trying so hard to get things right. And I just want our female listeners to really understand how emotionally not fragile, but complicated some of the men that you love are. And even though you can't see it, it's there.
And I think fragile is a fair word. And it's not in a bad way. Every human being is emotionally fragile. That's what it is to be human. And this is not a bad thing. You will never feel so connected as you are when you can tell someone that you feel afraid, and they're right there with you, looking you in the eye, not trying to change anything, not judging you, just sitting in the moment with you. And that goes both ways for men and women. And while we can't caretake them, we can make it easier to open up by being curious, asking questions. And I'm a big fan of, as a couples therapist, this is all about direct, clear communication, not demanding and criticizing, which is how it comes out. I mean, I've done it too. Steve the other day said something that sort of annoyed me, A, and then B, made me feel really bad. He made some comment, like a refrain. He was like, yeah, he said something, and I must have liked what he said. Unfortunately, I can't remember the details. And he said, yeah, not bad for a man who has no emotional intelligence. So clearly he's heard this from me over and over. And I know, but I don't feel like I've browbeat him, but it must have come up repeatedly that, how can we build more emotional intelligence? And how can
we build more emotional intelligence?
I'm sorry. It's not nice. I agree.
But that's the other thing that we should should mention is that men hear very much of what we say as criticism.
Yes.
All of it is criticism.
And the tricky thing is, depending on how securely attached a man is or how much ego strength he has, a tricky piece for women is that for some men, every single thing, even when really carefully and clearly worded, it goes right back to that failure, I'm not doing it right place.
Oh, definitely.
Other men, it's not, they would hear it genuinely if it was said clearly, vulnerably, and kindly without criticism. If it's said with I statements, instead of you never, I'm just making up a dumb example, you never do the dishes, it's always falls on me. I'm sick of it. Instead of that, an I statement and a gentler way would be to say, I feel frustrated when the dishes pile up, and what I really need is some help with that.
Right.
Now, that is the right way to communicate, but to your point, some men are still going to hear that. The implicit criticism is you're not doing what you should be doing.
Right. And depending on how much of that builds up in a relationship, the quicker they're going to hear that as criticism.
Exactly.
And these are hard loops to get out of. And I know you work with a lot of like pursuer, distancer dynamics in couples work. But as, a man shuts down, very often a woman can get bigger and kind of pursue and want to extract from their partner.
Yeah, so the distance pursuer or pursuer withdrawer dynamic is the most common one, but the good news is it's also the one that's easiest to change. And it's exactly what you're saying, Laura, just for those of you who may not be familiar with this. It's that one person either shuts down or moves away, and another person tends to pursue and try to engage, push, seek connection and resolution. And the irony or paradox of it, the tragedy of it, is that the more one person shuts down and moves away or protests with withdrawal, the more the other person grows bigger, becomes more insistent, and goes in hotter pursuit. And so it becomes this pattern of reacting and counter-reacting to these protective strategies, and nobody gets to the root of what they're really feeling with a clear, vulnerable expression. And that's what we're trying to change in therapy.
Right. And working with some men that really have some intense withdrawing tendencies.
Hell
It's amazing to hear how much they love their partner. And I hear it, how much they really respect, love, and care about their partner. And then due to the dynamics in the relationship, they get into such shutdown that they really don't even know how to text back or answer or...
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, like, give me the phone. I'll do it for you. Oh my gosh. Because this is just I'm not going to do it for them.
I know.
But it's amazing to watch what's happening.
Yeah.
And how shut down they become.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I'm so glad you're saying this, because the one video I had that went viral, and I think it's up to 6.5 million views
Oh my
on
gosh.
TikTok. Yeah, which is insane, right?
That is awesome.
Yeah, of course it translated into nothing in my
Nothing.
life. But that's okay. That's okay. I have a viral TikTok. I mean, I don't even know if I know what that means. But anyway, it was about withdrawers. And I went on saying, when you have a partner who withdraws, and 80% of the time it's a man. Women do it too,
Yeah.
but it's a much more of a male strategy for all the reasons we've enumerated. When you have a partner who does this, here's some of what's going on inside. And I talked about what people don't understand is that it's not just, oh, I don't want to hear you. And it's definitely not that I don't care.
Yeah.
It is that about 2% of the time, if somebody's already checked out or perhaps legitimately a diagnosable narcissist, the rest of the time, the partner cares deeply, but their system gets flooded.
Yep.
And they cannot manage those emotions. They're so afraid and unsure of what to do and overwhelmed by all of that, that they might make an attempt to fix. And if that doesn't work, and usually the wife getting the attempt to fix gets even more mad. I've done this a million times. That's what you're going to say to me? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
It's so tone deaf. Why would you respond to me that way? And then it's like, oh boy, red alert. Like, I'm backing out, disengage, shut it down.
Yeah.
Because the fear is more disappointment from the partner, which leads to shame, a bigger fight, which could jeopardize the relationship, and more feelings of just, I'm getting it wrong, I'm getting it wrong, I'm getting it wrong, and I'm a failure.
I see
so it's
that.
complicated.
It is so complicated. So, I mean, what are we saying? What are we saying to women? What are our takeaways here?
Let's give some
takeaways. If you love a
takeaways.
Man, or even if you're raising boys,
Yeah.
what do we make space for them?
Yeah.
For
know
their,
that they're vulnerable,
Yeah.
know that they're fragile, know they love as deeply and want love as deeply as you. They are not what's happening at the surface. That's
They
not all
are
of
definitely not what's happening at the surface.
Yeah. Men are really misunderstood, and men are so tender and sweet and caring.
And they want love, and they want connection, and they want good marriages, and they want good families.
They do. They do. I mean, I do not ever have a couple anymore for years now where the man wants a divorce. I have a lot of couples where the woman wants a divorce.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, maybe another takeaway is, I'm kind of kidding, but not really, like, you could suggest therapy. Like, we need to get men into therapy, but not to be responsible for that. Not everyone's going to do that. And that's certainly a big driver of who shows up in both of our offices. Like, my wife said, I need therapy.
Yeah. I'm emotionally unavailable. That's the euphemism, right?
Yeah. Or I need to be like fixed. I'm broken. I'm bad.
Oh,
I've
I hate
had
that.
so many
It's
people
a terrible frame.
who will say, if I don't change, my wife's going to leave me. Yikes.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess also remember, it always takes two to tango. Even if you're frustrated with your husband or your partner, know there's more going on beneath the surface, but that every couple is in a pattern, a co-created pattern. And you've got to really look at and focus on you and how you show up differently. And if you have a partner, use questions with curious engagement that invite your partner to open up. And then if they open up, show compassion, validate,
listen.
make it safe.
Definitely make it safe.
Yeah, we cannot expect men to be strong and capable all the time and also demand that they're vulnerable. It needs to be okay for both parties in a coupleship to be human.
100%.
What else? Anything else you think is an important takeaway?
I think we could go on forever on this, on the permutations of this.
Yeah.
Especially with the ways men manage these feelings can be so different. It can be addiction and all kinds of infidelity and things like that. But
yeah, and we referenced that.
Yeah, we did reference it. But at the core, on a man that really wants to be connected to his partner, there's just helping that man feel a full range of feelings is where we need to go. So if you can't do that, you start with you and then begin to bring that into normalizing the relationship. That together we can feel a full range of feelings.
Yeah, and let's just continue to distinguish that we don't want to try to manage our partner's emotions and get them to open up, because that's a form of pursuing that I've talked about in the past. It won't work. Someone who's not willing to open up isn't going to open up. But there's a big difference between being like, you need to open up to me now. And then what I hear women saying is, well, that's not really vulnerable. I didn't like that answer. That's not good enough. I mean, then, who's not going to shut down? So this is not about vulnerability, is not you say what I want you to say the way I want you to say it. It's going to be a different expression. You're two different people. You're probably very, very different. But learn to understand that vulnerability and emotion shows itself in nuanced ways.
Yeah.
And to be really accepting of what your partner will give and really create emotional safety, because that will encourage more sharing.
Yeah.
And you and I
definitely at different levels. Like maybe what Colette and I consider vulnerable sharing is not what my husband or your husband would consider vulnerable sharing.
We already know that it's not.
We know that's not true. So, but you accept what shows up, like be with what shows up. If you don't have a safe relationship, it's very hard to get past that.
Yep. And even in a safe relationship, it can be challenging.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So really just focusing on the safety, and I think explicitly letting your partner know, I want to hear from you. It's okay to not be strong every minute of the day. It's okay to tell me what you're scared about, what you need from me, what you wish was happening, what's making you uncomfortable. I want to hear. I will listen.
Okay,
I will
take it.
Can
I say one more thing about that? And then when they do tell you some of these things, don't use these things against them at a later date.
Oh my God. That goes without saying, but you're right. I'm glad you said it.
Some people do that. I mean, that's some, I hear that from my men. If I share this will be brought up against me in a fight. This will be used against me. It's like, ugh.
I hear that too. Yeah. I mean, that's just whatever kind of relationship you're in. That is something that is an absolute no-go on any level. Pulling poisoned darts out because you want to retaliate or someone's hurt you and you want to hurt back. But once you do that, you will undermine global safety in the relationship, not just in the argument. So stay away from that. Be vulnerable, ask for vulnerability, be patient with what you get back. Understand that the man in your life is probably feeling a lot more emotion than he shows, wants connection just as much as you and may not have language for it yet. And start a dialogue about this.
I love it. I think we nailed it.
All right. Well, thank you all. And please check out our website, insightsfromthecouch.org, for show notes and links to articles and books we mentioned and resources. And join us for our next episode. We'll see you soon.